Hey guys, Jay here. So hope you guys are all having a fantastic start to the year. We're gonna start things off on this channel with a very interesting loudspeaker, and I'll give you a hint. It has a 13-inch paper cone woofer that moves a lot of air, as you can imagine, which is super badass, and a 5-inch paper cone mid-woofer to match with it, and a 1-inch aluminum dome tweeter enclosed in a sealed enclosure. Yep, that's right, this is the KLH Model 7 speakers, the bigger brother to the KLH Model 5 speakers that caused a rave amongst audiophiles and reviewers alike a few years back. And it's one hell of a loudspeaker. In fact, it's so badass that it makes it onto my reference recommendation list on my Patreon page in this price category. But as I always say, no speaker is perfect, so this speaker is going to have some of its caveats, so make sure to watch to the end of this video to make sure that this speaker is the right fit for you. And as always, it's gonna always come down to preference. Starting with the overall look of the speaker, it's gonna be a vintage mid-century look, and that's not going to be a look for everyone's taste. But I do have to admit, it is a speaker that can easily look good in many different rooms. Now with that being said, let's start with the build quality and the things that I liked about the build quality of the speaker and the things that I didn't like so much about the build quality of this speaker. Well, starting with the things that I liked about it, well, it's a very well-built loudspeaker. First of all, it's very sleek in its design, and when I say sleek, I don't mean that it is small, because this speaker is not small by any stretch of the imagination. It's a bigger loudspeaker than even the Model 5 speakers. I mean sleek in the sense that it's not so deep. As you can see, the cabinet is pretty narrow, which means that you can place this speaker closer to the wall boundaries, especially the back wall. And along with the acoustic suspension design of the speaker, as we'll talk about in a minute, it's gonna be easier to place without getting that boomy, nasty bass in small to medium-sized room as well. Another thing that I really like about this speaker is that it has a small bolt that attaches the stand to the speakers. And we didn't have this on the Model 5s before. I believe they added this now on the Model 5s as well, but don't quote me on that. But it makes the biggest difference with the Model 7s, I find, because it's a bigger loudspeaker. It's a lot harder to maneuver with the stands if we didn't have that bolt. So I think that's a very good addition, and it's a well thought out design. Also, I really like the finish quality and the durability of the finish. Now, the finish isn't the highest quality you can get in the market, especially for $6,000. But I have to say, for vintage style cabinet designs, compared to let's say the Klipsch Heritage Series or even the Wharfdales, I find it to be a much better quality. It's just going to be a more durable finish than those type of speakers, because especially with the Heritage Series from Klipsch, if you looked at it wrong, then it would scratch. So compared to that, it's just a more durable type of finish on this loudspeaker. And last but not the least, I really like the grille on this speaker. I really like the material of the grille, as it has this kind of like nice feeling to it, and it's very elegant, as we saw on the Model 5s as well. But especially with the bigger grille on the Model 7s, it just comes across more elegant. And especially because I prefer to have the grille on the speaker during listening, you know, the aesthetic becomes quite important for the grille as well. Now, the reason that I prefer the grills on during listening is because this speaker has edges without the grills that can cause diffraction, which is basically interference of the sound. Now, moving on to things that I wasn't quite hot about with this speaker in terms of build quality, well, starting with the grill. Yeah, I know I just said that I really love the grill, but on my pair, it seemed to start sagging a little bit, creating this kind of crease around the speaker edges, and this is due to the tension being wrong on this rather large grill. And I talked to KLH about it, and they told me that they are going to fix this issue by increasing the tension. But in case you run into this problem, they did let me know that it's gonna be covered under warranty, so grill replacement will be available if you have this issue. Now, they did also tell me to spray it with a water bottle, and if that's something that you want to do, obviously don't do it with the grills on the speakers. Take the grill off the speakers and spray away from the speakers. You don't want to water damage the drivers. But I personally didn't want to do that on a $6,000 speaker, and nor do I think that one should. So this is a problem I'm glad KLH is addressing. And talking about warranty, you do get 10-year warranty with KLH on the speaker. And the second thing that I'm going to be a little bit critical about is the overall value of the build quality here. Now, while it's a perfectly built loudspeaker, it's perfectly durable and a good cabinetry design, and you are getting a bigger cabinet than the Model 5s, you're not necessarily getting a better material in terms of the cabinet. You are getting still MDF, just a bigger cabinet, and a 13-inch woofer. There is not that much change in terms of the material or the quality of the drivers with the mid-range or the tweeter, nor the binding post or the crossover components, all about the same level as the Model 5s, which again are perfectly fine parts and drivers, and some may argue why change something that is already working perfectly fine and was much loved on the Model 5s. So maybe there's no reason to change it. But for $6,000, I felt like there was a little bit more. I wish there was a little bit more upgrade in terms of the material quality here. And talking about material quality, the stand is the same way. Now, while I really appreciate the fact that they added a screw so that everything can be moved as a one piece, while moving, because the KLH Model 7 is a much larger loudspeaker, the little rubber feet underneath the stands came off on one of my stands. And when I looked at it, I was like, really? This tiny thing on a $6,000 speaker? I shouldn't have that problem. And I mean, yes, it's not a big deal. You can glue it back on and you're good to go. But it was something just wasn't sitting right with me for $6,000 and something that I didn't feel too good about. But now moving on to the sound quality of the speaker, I have to say it does put a smile on my face because this speaker really sets a new standard in terms of the bass quality. This is an acoustic suspension design, and this is really what I really love about the bass of this loudspeaker. Acoustic suspension designs work in such a way that in a sealed enclosure, the air gets trapped inside because it has nowhere to escape because there's no port, which means that the air trapped inside is used as a suspension, as a spring for the driver, the 13-inch woofer, to spring right back into its resting position, and it's ready to go. So this allows a lot of benefits in terms of that bass. For example, it has much less of a steep roll-off compared to a bass reflex design, which allows you to have this more fuller, richer, textured bass that is going to be a very unique type of bass quality that you get out of a loudspeaker. In fact, some would argue that it's the best build quality you can get out of a loudspeaker is in an acoustic suspension design. But here it's very important to note that not all sealed speakers are acoustic suspension designs, so it's important to make that distinction, but acoustic suspension designs are all sealed enclosures. Now, if that confuses you, just know that acoustic suspension designs rule in terms of bass. And with the KLH Model 7s here, with a 13-inch paper cone woofer, you bet you are getting that acoustic suspension design bass in spades. And really, in terms of the bass quality on the speaker, it is exceptional. Compared to even the 1528 bookshelf speakers from Orendel, which has enormous bass presence and can pressurize my room no problem, the bass quality in terms of texture, nuance, and detail in the bass is just more palpable, more musical, and more chest pounding. It is just a very dynamic, very musical type of bass that you can get out of this Model 7 loudspeaker. And directly comparing it to my main speaker, the Platimon VC1s, it absolutely annihilates the Platimons in terms of bass extension and dynamics. It is no question that the KLH Model 7 is the king when it comes to bass. And you did get that palpable, tactile, punchy bass, especially in the mid bass on the Model 5 speakers. However, the difference here is that on the Model 7s, you get that palpableness and you get that tactileness and the tightness of the bass in the sub bass as well, which is quite rare, and you don't quite get that with a lot of speakers, and it's kind of a thing for acoustic suspension designs, I find. And I don't say this lightly, but the bass quality here is gonna set a new standard with the KLH Model 7s in this price category. And in fact, I'm gonna compare every speaker that comes in here in this price category to the KLH Model 7 bass because it's just that good. It's the new standard, new bass quality to beat in this price category for me. So that's going to be something that I really liked about the bass. But in terms of the things that I didn't like about the bass, Well, I played my Songe reference CD, and if you know the CD, it's a reference track recorded in the Maribel Church, and I helped record it. It's a live recording using the best gear with no expenses spared. For example, using the Neumann M150 microphones, that's like $10,000 each. And these tracks are gonna have live recordings of a big battle harp that goes into all the sub-bass territory, as well as double bass and cello, just absolutely texture out the wazoo. And to test the texture of a loudspeaker like this is a perfect reference track to do so. So I popped it on and I tested it. And while I agree that it's extremely good in terms of texture and it's easy to set up to get that texture and bass and nuance to sound its best in terms of its bass and not get bloated, I still found that you need to play around with the room placement. And while KLH did tell me that it is less room sensitive, I did find that you still have to pull away from the wall boundaries at least 2 feet for me in my room to get that bass under control. I mean, it does have a 13-inch woofer in the speaker, so I think that's to be expected even in an acoustic suspension design. So really the only caveat and the thing that I didn't like about the bass on the speaker is that it's not plug and play like KLH says. You do still need to have some room. Even in a small room, it can work, but you do need to have the ability to pull the speaker out into the room at least 1 or 2 feet to have that bass under control. Just because it's an acoustic suspension design doesn't mean that, it's just magically going to work in a small room with no breathing room. And if you wanted to check out the Songe CD, my reference tracks that I just mentioned, make sure to check the link description below. Now moving on to the mid-range and the things that I liked and disliked about the mid-range of this loudspeaker. Well, firstly, the things that I liked about it, well, it's very neutral. It's very easy to listen, it's musical, and because of the bass and the full natured, fleshed out sound of the speaker, it's not gonna sound lean whatsoever. In fact, quite the opposite. It's gonna sound very much more fleshed out, full-bodied, and it's gonna be akin to like Sonos Faber speakers in terms of how warm and rich the mid-range is, but with a little bit more clarity and transparency than even Sonos Faber speakers comparatively, let's say the Sonetto line. And personally for me, that 5-inch paper cone mid-range woofer is married very well with the 13-inch paper cone woofer. So because they're the same materials, the overall tonality is that natural paper cone sound. And if you guys know me and my channel and been following me for a while, then you guys know that I love the paper cone sound. It just sounds natural, easygoing, and it may not be the last thing in terms of nuance and detail like the Arendal 1528 bookshelf speaker or the Platimons in terms of transparency and that more audiophile things like nuanced detail. In that regard, I find the Arendals and the Platimons to be more transparent, more neutral, more balanced, and comes across with more nuance and transparency and detail. But with the KLH Model 7s, I find the mid-range to be natural without detracting away too much from the listening experience if you don't mind the fact that not all the nuance and detail is readily there right there in front of you. And that's going to be the main thing I didn't like about the mid-range on this loudspeaker is that it's not a huge step up from the mid-range of the Model 5s. It's going to be neutral, it's going to be a natural, neutral presentation. But in fact, the mid-range on the Model 5 was a little bit more palpable, faster attack and decay transients, perhaps because it has, a smaller woofer, but just a little bit more palpable. So not all is an upgrade directly from the Model 5s to the Model 7s, even though in the grand scheme of things, the Model 7 is definitely overall a much better speaker than the Model 5s. Now moving on to the treble and the things that I liked and disliked about the treble response on this loudspeaker, starting with the things that I liked. Well, I really like the fact that it's very similar to the Model 5's tweeter response, meaning that, the transparency is perfectly fine. The overall airiness, the snappiness, attack and decay is going to be very similar to the Model 5s. And so I enjoy the Model 5's tweeter response. So the treble is going to be very similar in quality and refinement. And I really didn't have much problems with it. Now, the thing that I didn't like about it, on the other hand, is that it's too similar to the Model 5s. Now, the Model 5 is a $3,000 speaker after the price increase. And the Model 7 here is $6,000. Now that's double the price, and for double the price, I'm not getting any more refinement. You're essentially getting the same aluminum dome tweeter with small modifications for the Model 7 here, and it's just going to be overall way too similar for the price. So if you like the sound of the Model 5's tweeter like I did, then all good, but you're not getting an upgrade in terms of refinement, extra detail, extra nuance. None of that is given here. In fact, the dial on the back is exactly the same. It has the high, medium, and low setting, and KLH says that high setting is the most neutral setting, but I found that to be the most forward. So I didn't like that setting. It was a little bit too bright for me. I stuck with the mid setting, and if you're really sensitive to high frequency, then you may even prefer the low setting. So I do like the fact that there is some room for adjustment with the dials on the back. That's a nice feature that was on the Model 5s, that's on the Model 7 as well. And a trick that I found, if I can call it that, is that if I use a source that has a more of a refinement in the high frequency, and that gives up a little bit more smoothness in the high frequency, for example, like my Shenling SED 3.3 CD player that has a tube output and an R2R DAC inside, or like my Harmony turntable setup that is fully analog that gives off this a little bit more refinement and smoothness in the high frequency, it marries well with the KLH Model 7 and gives off more of a refined, more smooth type of sound in the high frequency that is much more enjoyable than if I were to play digital and stream to the KLH Model 7s. Now moving on to imaging and sound staging. Well, first of all, I like the fact that the sound stage is quite adequate. It creates a nice wall of sound. It throws a large sound stage and has good imagery, good focus of imagery as well. And I really like the fact that KLH decided to offset the tweeter and the mid-range driver, as well as include a grill that helps with the off-axis response. No, you do not have to round the corners of speakers all the time to help with diffraction. In fact, offsetting the tweeter and the mid-range driver helps with diffraction. As well, because it has offset mid-range and tweeters, you can create a larger sweet spot in a rather smaller room, and this allows for a much more involving type of sound stage, a wall of sound that is quite satisfying to listen to. Now, the thing that I didn't like about the soundstage and the imagery is that, well, if you're looking for a more 3D-like soundstage, this is not going to do that. It's more of a wall of sound, and it's a very satisfying, large wall of sound, and it definitely has scale because this is a big loudspeaker. It has that scale muscularity from that 13-inch woofer, and it does not sound like a wimpy small speaker. It sounds like a big, muscular speaker with a lot of warmth and bass and air movement. But it is not going to have that 3D enveloping type of soundstage you would get from, let's say, a horn speaker or even the Klipsch Heritage series. You're not gonna get that 3D kind of effect. So that's something to keep in mind if that's something that you're looking for. And in terms of how much power this speaker needs to sound its best, well, acoustic suspension design, and one of the downsides with it is that it needs a lot of power. Now, KLH did design the Model 7s very well to where it doesn't require a lot of power, but it still does require some power, especially high current in my opinion. So even though the speaker isn't terribly hard to drive with a 4 ohm nominal impedance and 2.9 ohms at 1 kHz and drops down to about 3.4 ohms under 500 Hz, it does need some power and an amplifier that's capable of handling those lower impedances. Well, I wouldn't say it needs it, but it certainly does benefit from it, and the textures and the bass quality does benefit from an amplifier that can deliver that current at those low impedances. And I'm not suggesting that the EMM Lab MTRS, which is my reference amplifier, is to be used with a $6,000 loudspeaker like this, because it is a $50,000 piece, but it was a good experimentation because when I put the MTRS to power the KLH Model 7s, I mean, without question, all the bass textures and nuance and everything that I could ever ask for in an acoustic suspension design with a 13-inch woofer came to life. I mean, full glory, bass texture, whoa, like just woof. Absolutely delightful. So of course, in my search for a amplifier that is less expensive that can deliver similar quality with the KLH Model 7s to recommend to you guys was quite of a daunting task. And I will have to admit, it doesn't quite get there like the MTRS, but the Accuphase E700 on the higher end, if you're looking for a one-piece integrated amplifier that can drive these speakers with very good authority, I would say the E700 is an excellent choice, and even the E3000 I reviewed prior can be a very good pairing to the KLH Model 7s, and it just gives you a lot of bass texture, nuance, and refinement in the mid-range and treble that brings the speaker to another level. So I think that's a very worthy investment if you are looking for a high-end integrated amplifier for the KLH Model 7s. But if you're more on the budget and you want to benefit and get that bass oomph out of these speakers, I think something like the Galleon TSA A75 was a really good pairing with this speaker. It wasn't quite as good as the Accuphase, but really, it brought out a lot of the bass textures and detail of that acoustic suspension design while having the mid-range and treble to be very balanced and really natural sounding from that paper cone driver. So it really did portray the KLH Model 7s to sound very musical with the TSA A75. Now my second recommendation in the more price-conscious category would be the Emotiva. Now, the Emotiva Bass X actually delivers a lot of power and sufficient current to drive these speakers to very satisfying levels, and it can get loud, it can get powerful, and it can punch pretty darn hard with this combination. I think either of these two will be very satisfying for the end user, and honestly, I would just stay away from Class D designs. Even tube designs sounded really good with the KLH Model 7s, even though it wouldn't be my first choice. But for whatever reason, even my Live Harmony monoblocks, as well as my beloved AGD monoblocks, which are Class D amplifiers, very excellent Class D amplifiers, I may add, didn't sound so good with the Model 7s for whatever reason. And it's kind of weird because technically Class D should be good at handling low impedances and delivering current, but for whatever reason, it just didn't sound good. As it did with the Emotiva and the TSA and even tube amplifiers. So I would just stay away from Class D amplifiers just to be safe with the KLH Model 7s. Now, just to be clear, I'm being very nitpicky and these are more of a catered recommendation. The KLH Model 7s actually sound pretty darn good with most amplifiers, even Class D amplifiers, even though they really wouldn't be my first choice. They're really easygoing and really pairs well with multiple amplifiers, and they don't sound bad, outright bad, with an amplifier pairing that I've tried. They all sound good, but it's just a matter of which sounds better for the price. And so these are the recommendations that I have come up with. So yeah, that's pretty much it from me. And if you have any more questions or comparisons that you want, comment down below. I'll try to answer every question that I can in the comment section. All I ask is that you click that like button and subscribe to this channel for more videos just like this. And I'll see you guys on my next video. Until next time.